People love the idea of Finland. They love the idea of the society, the school system. We ultimately have to learn to exercise our judgment, identify the opportunities that can get very big. My job is to be helpful in there being like another Google level company that comes out of Finland that does something good in the world. RNA technologies, or now defense, AI, obviously, many others. No one here has built truly earth-shatteringly groundbreaking technology for carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, for instance. Some of these biggest questions that truly are existential to humanity. How inspiring is it to work on something like that? And if we can get especially younger, smarter people to just take that as a default and not accept anything less as their job, then I think we could be going in the direction where I think Finland, at its best, what it could be.
Hello, and welcome to Joy of Finland, the podcast that highlights Finland's strengths and areas of improvement. I'm your host, Matt, and I'd like to introduce our guest, Jyri Engeström. Jyri is a co-founder and general partner at Yes VC, an early-stage venture capital firm. He also, before that, co-founded a mobile social network that was acquired by Google and a recommendations app that was acquired by Groupon. He's made early investments in companies like Unity, Iceye, Oura, and many more. He also is the co-host of Startup-ministeriö, a podcast that unpacks the hottest topics in the world of startups. So Jyri, thought we could get started with talking a little bit more about a recent episode that you did in your own podcast, which was comparing, I believe, Finland and Sweden's startup ecosystem.
Sweden's about twice as big in terms of GDP as an economy than Finland. It's about 50% of all of the venture capital that is invested in the Nordics combined. About half of that goes to Sweden. It has many of the most valuable startups or tech companies in Europe, including Klarna and Spotify. And Swedish founders have built some of the most iconic companies, including things like Skype. Finland's about 5 years behind Sweden, just in terms of all of the stats, including I think Sweden it broke the 1 billion mark in annual venture capital deployed or raised by startups in 2015, and Finland broke that same 1 billion mark in 2020. And all you have to do is keep doing what we're doing in order to slowly catch up with Sweden. And also, I think that Finland is punching above its weight in many ways. I frankly don't look so much at Sweden. I look at places like Israel and Estonia, not Sweden, because Estonia is even tinier than Finland, also has a weird language, and in many ways started from behind, and yet is punching above its weight also, and actually much more so than Finland. If you look at, just referring to Skype, obviously a bunch of the early Skype guys came from Estonia, and a lot of the engineering was there, and all of that, it's like the Skype mafia they just raised the largest venture fund in the Nordics, I believe. It's like a $400 million fund. There's just a lot going on in Estonia, even though it's tiny, and it shares the same disadvantages as Finland. So the key difference there is that the Estonian government culture, bureaucracy, all of these things that we like to talk about here in Finland just tend to be a lot more agile than here. And there's more of a go-getter attitude, fundamentally. It's not as cozy a place. And I think that attitude issue is something that, frankly, it's both annoying, like we talked about that a lot. There was a comparative study that I was referring to on our podcast that was recently published in Kauppalehti, or the local sort of business daily, with results from an interview survey of a bunch of CEOs, tech CEOs in both Sweden and Finland, based on which then the argument was the reason Swedes always win is because they have this kind of born global thinking. And I think Timo particularly was annoyed, saying, look, all of the Lifeline Ventures backed entrepreneurs, certainly all the Yes VC backed entrepreneurs that come out of Finland, obviously already have that same thinking. I agree with Timo on the criticism that it's not really a mindset issue as much as it is difficult to put it into practice even if you think that way, if you just don't have the capabilities. And to me, that really boils down to networks. I was referring to this on our show too. It's like Timo and I recently co-invested in a Finnish company, and we decided we had a small amount of allocation left that we should bring on like a stellar investor from the Valley. And I can do that in literally one WhatsApp message, and it's very quick. It's tough if you don't have those relationships. And that's what I see consistently the Swedish folk doing. That's what I see the Estonians doing. And I particularly watch the Israeli excel at that. Finns, not so much. I'm still the only venture capital firm general partner who's Finnish in Silicon Valley. There's a bunch of GPs from European funds, like all those folks have senior partners in Silicon Valley permanently. Finns don't. We're stuck in this, I think, adolescence or childhood. We also talked about how particularly the big investors in Finland, like the pension funds, also the large corporates, still think of the startup ecosystem, with no disrespect to Slush, as a kindergarten of kids. It's not really significant. But coming back to this question of the Finland versus Sweden thing, or Estonia, the key difference, I think, is that Swedes have closer relationships with Silicon Valley particularly, but I would say the world at large in general. Same thing with the Estonians. Finns must do that. If we remain isolated, we can't continue to sustain our society as a welfare society, all that, just because we're going to lose out on the opportunities. And we've had this period when Finland joined the EU in the 90s, when I was a teenager, that was very open-minded. And ikkunat auki Eurooppaan, opened the windows to Europe, this old French, I believe, saying that was adopted at the time, and I think will ultimately be the right strategy. And the United States is not a perfect world or a perfect country. However, I think their model is the right model. Representative democracy and, frankly, capitalism. And that's why we need more exchange. And that's part of what I see Silicon Valley people do. You oftentimes have kids in their 20s who have built several startups or have several startups in parallel. It's still rare in Finland. And so I think that we're throttling our own learning curve, both by not aggressively enough going outside of a comfort zone into the English-speaking world mostly to expose ourselves to new ideas there and just learn the ways of practicing startup building. And then secondly, we should allow ourselves to try out new ideas quickly, look for demand, which is oftentimes most Finns still like to first build a product and then look for a market rather than doing it the other way around, which is the Silicon Valley way of just running a bunch of ads and seeing what sticks. What is it that people want? And then once you realize you've got something, a landing page that's converting really well about a product you've maybe never even thought about how to build, you can then begin to raise capital against saying, look, I've got 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 200 people a day signing up to my mailing list or whatever. That's talking about this exciting vision of the future. Now I think I should build a product for them. Ultimately, it needs to turn into non-Finns moving to live here. We need to recruit internationally better when we build companies. This is a critical thing that a lot of the work at Finnish startup communities around. Of course, there are barriers that my family has experienced around just basic immigration, but ultimately, it's like a flywheel, right? So the more international people are here, the more will come. I think the biggest issue still for the folks, and I don't know if you agree with me, but certainly my friends who have looked at relocating to Finland from abroad is, wow, there just aren't that many foreign people here. Whereas all you have to do is go to Paris or Stockholm even, and you just feel a more international vibe. There's just more people who are international. And so I'm hopeful that as we work slowly to bring more people in, then we're going to hit some kind of an inflection point where it just gets a lot easier all of a sudden for people to make that decision about moving here to work here for a while. That's a lot of things said.
Yeah, lots to unpack there. And to maybe sum up your core thing when you're comparing Finland and Sweden or Finland with other places is being able to build relationships internationally.
Timo was like, well, our Silicon Valley founders better than Finnish founders. So I'm like, yeah, they're about 10 times better. And he's, whoa, that's like a lot. Aren't Finnish founders just as smart? And yes, they are just as smart. But then I have all these examples of Finnish founders who become 10 times more successful in the Valley, including myself. These are Finns who are building unicorn companies in Silicon Valley who would struggle to do that in Finland, honestly, just because one of the things you get is this pressure to focus on something that can get really big. Of course, it means you have intense competition as well, but you also have everyone around you just expecting you to do that, and also very easily converting to invest in your company or work in it or help it out in some other way because that's the expectation. Versus here, where you're running in a swamp versus running on this perfect running track that's been built for Olympic level sprinting, I don't know, on some stadium. And that's part of where we still have a lot of work to do. Things have improved a great deal in Finland. And now this next phase, what's been lacking almost entirely has been the systematic recruitment and attraction of international people who come work here. Like really, like it's independent companies like Supercell or Volt or maybe Nokia that have been doing it on their own. But there hasn't really been like a concerted effort the way there is in, let's say, France. France has like French Tech. It's an organization that works with the immigration office there just to attract people. They have a permanent staff in Silicon Valley. I remember when Katarina and I were applying for French visas, they literally came to our house and had tea and figured out how to make it work. The visas came in just a couple weeks versus a nightmare experience here where, 2 years, and ultimately the result was that Katarina and our daughter left Finland just because it was a really awful experience. And I respect people who go through that and take that challenge because it shows you have some grit. But my God, could it be smoother?
Are you able to share more about what those challenges were like specifically in terms of it taking a long time? But I suppose that relates to the bureaucracy.
I think fundamentally one of the things is we still lack a tech investor visa, so that you invest in a bunch of companies here. Let's say you're an American, you get a visa. Just about every other reasonable European country, including, France or Estonia, has this. You have to already have a Finnish wife or husband, or then you have to have a Finnish employer here. But a lot of people who are in tech, they have their own venture firm or they have a company somewhere else. Maybe they only want to live here 6 months of the year. What we should be building are rails for all of this to work smoothly so that we make it extremely easy for people to live here part of the year. Same thing with they may be employed by a foreign company. They might not need a Finnish company as their employer to be eligible to live part of the year here. Because maybe they're doing something here that's beneficial to Finland.
I think one thing on the positive side is you touched on Finnish people being smart and there being strong engineering talent here. If you want to expand on that or any other strengths about Finland.
Top engineers are designers and they are product people as well. They're not just engineers. I think we need more of those from Finland. And in its best incarnation, they're also business people. So they're capable of leading, attracting other people to come work with them, join the journey. I often say this, you're a founder or CEO, you just have 3 jobs, communicate the vision, raise the financing, hire the best people. You can do that if you can show by example, right? You hit an idea that comes with this technical solution that is extremely impressive. And then it just becomes a breeze. It becomes so easy to recruit people because all the other smart people around you take note and they're like, that's exceptionally smart. That is a big vision. I think this is a winner. I want a part of that. Let me work on this. And it's just magical to see that happen. And it's frustrating how rare that is. And I wonder, why is it so rare, particularly here? We're just talking about, like with some of the other VCs here, there's maybe 2 good deals, seed deals in Finland every year. Maybe 2 or 3. Meaning good deals that can return a small $100 million fund. I think Timo Ahopelto had even calculated the unicorn birthing rate, the Finnish unicorn generation rate. I think he said when they started Lifeline Ventures, it was like 0.8 unicorns per year. And now in the 2020s, it's already over 2. So basically, at the current rate, we've more than doubled in 10 years this rate. But it's still, let's say it's just 2 unicorns per year from Finland. 2 unicorns per year. Wow, that sounds great. But then we have 20, maybe more venture firms just in Finland who are all competing over those 2 good deals annually. It's a very short supply compared with Silicon Valley, where obviously you have hundreds more venture firms, but that rate is just several orders of magnitude higher. And that is what the job is. Ultimately, everything depends on our ability to increase that rate. Basically, start more good companies. And I go back and forth between thinking, does it mean we just have to start more companies, period? Meaning that there's always going to be 99 crap companies for 1 awesome company? Or could it be that we can basically just increase the density of good companies in that and maybe we don't need to just found more companies. Maybe we can just improve the quality. I tend to want to believe that. I'm not sure it's true. And so ultimately, I think that's where the rubber hits the road. We can talk all day long about attracting foreign talent, something like, I don't know, what we would talk about, taxes or immigration or language barriers and sending folks to intern in Silicon Valley companies. But ultimately, like all of that, none of that matters if we can't increase the unicorn birthing rate, birth rate. It's what I find myself telling entrepreneurs is, why would you bother working on something small if you could work on something that's potentially really big? And I find that when you choose the latter, recruiting becomes very easy and people actually hear about you and they love it and they contact you. So recruiting turns from being this thing where you have to go outbound to more of an inbound recruiting, just because your vision sounds so cool. It's like Elon Musk says about, I don't know, the engineers who come to work at Starship or work at Starbase on Starship, the big rocket, this is the coolest thing to work on in the world, period. So many times people are working hard on the wrong thing. It's more important to work on the right thing than it is to work hard. Because when you're working on the right thing, it just becomes really compelling to work on it. And so almost inevitably, those people end up working hard too. And I feel like the conversation, I read the Helsingin Sanomat and a lot of articles in Finland I've noticed touch on the topics of burnout, uupumus, työuupumus. It's like all these Finns are burning out at their jobs. There's this undertone of these employers are driving these Finns too hard. I'm not an advocate for super long hours, but I am an advocate for working on the right thing. And I think that generates this desire to just work really hard because you feel this agency and like you can actually influence things. I think that's the real issue why people are burning out here, is that there just aren't enough of those opportunities to work on things that feel like they really matter, that they are great. They are so inspiring. They will change the world. And it comes back to this thing about the unicorns where I don't know how to do that, but I feel like we ultimately have to learn to exercise our judgment, identify the opportunities that can get very big. And I feel like that's my job. My job is to somehow be helpful in, before my career is over, there being like another Google level company that comes out of Finland that does something good in the world. And I know that's my job, so it's very simple. For example, RNA technologies, or now defense, AI, obviously, many others. No one here has built truly earth-shatteringly groundbreaking technology for carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, for instance. Some of these biggest questions that truly are existential to humanity. How inspiring is it to work on something like that? So I feel like that's the key. And if we can get especially younger, smarter people to just take that as a default and not accept anything less as their job, then I think we could be going in the direction where I think Finland at its best, what it could be.